stars of animation are shining. It's time to stay tuned. And now, here's your host, Bill Machi.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back back to Stay Tuned Live. This is it's been a year. It's been roughly a year since Stay Tuned Live has been on Streaming the Magic, and I would first of all like to thank Streaming the Magic for having me here back, and of course thanks to all of you watching out there on Facebook Live. This is an exclusively Streaming the Magic broadcast this evening, so if you're watching it live, congratulations, you made it to the live show. And if you're watching it later on, well, I hope it's still good later on as well. My name, of course, is Phil Machi, and I'm your host. I host the Stay Tuned podcast, which, if you haven't heard it yet, it's a show that is dedicated to animated TV and film and the people who make animation possible. Now, tonight begins the start of a little bit of a different little sidestep project. This is called the Summer Reading Series because it is dedicated to authors, and these are authors who are talking about things kind of related to animation. Tonight, in particular, is going to be related to Disney animation, and my guest this evening is Don Ballard. Don Ballard, he's an author and a historian. And he's going to be here talking about the history of the Disneyland Hotel. Don's first book, The Disneyland Hotel, The Early Years, 1954 to 1988, was published back in 2005, and it coincided with Disneyland and the Disneyland Hotel's 50th anniversary celebrations. Don's second book, Disneyland Hotel, 1954 to 1959, The Little Motel in the Middle of the Orange Grove, details the Disneyland Hotel in its very early formative years, and that was published in 2011. Don claims to possess the most complete collection of Disneyland Hotel ephemera and memorabilia in the world, guys, in the world, which is pretty impressive. He was a featured speaker at Disney's D23 Expo in 2011 and 2013, and has spoken at numerous events on the Disneyland Hotel's rich history. Don is just now finishing a third book on the Disneyland Hotel covering the 1960s, which should be out this summer. He will also be featured, if you guys are members of Disney Plus, he'll be featured in an upcoming episode of Behind the Attraction, covering the history of, you guessed it, the Disneyland Hotel. So for his latest revised book, Disneyland Hotel, The Early Years, 1954 through 1988, you can go ahead and visit theoldmillpress.com, and copies will ship in August. So without further ado, I would like to now introduce to all of you lovely folks at home, Mr. Don Ballard.
Hello, how are you? Great to be here.
Great to have you. Look at all the books behind you. It's very appropriate.
Yep, 2 of those are mine.
And the rest of them is somebody else's library that you stole and put behind you as a prop.
I did, just for this show.
Well, I really appreciate the effort. That's really great. Well, Don, welcome to the show. And as I was mentioning before I brought you on, of course, you know, Stay Tuned is all about animation, and of course, the Disneyland Hotel was born out of the history of some of the greatest animation, of course, the world's ever known. So I guess the first thing I want to ask you, for those of us that don't know, what about the Disneyland Hotel? When you would walk into that hotel, what about it would make it feel like it was connected to all the great film history?
Well, it just had a vibe to it. I mean, you just felt like, its name was the Disneyland Hotel, and it had a lot of animation art on the walls, in the rooms, in the lobbies. You know, there were all kinds of pictures and artwork. that depicted, some of the attractions at Disneyland or some of the movies, the animated movies that Disney had. But you just always got this vibe that, your vacation truly began the minute you walked in, the minute you checked in, or the minute you walked into the lobby. You got this feeling that you were in the company of Disney and you were going to have fun. That your sole purpose was to laugh, enjoy yourself, and have fun. And that's kind of the feeling I got. Just driving up to the place, I got that feeling.
Were the members of the staff there, were they trained to behave the same way that the park cast members would?
Yes, they all have that that Disney kind of magic that they're very welcoming, they're very friendly, they go out of their way to accommodate and help you, and they're just it parallels whatever is in the park. It parallels over to the hotel in many of the aspects. The food, the quality of the entertainment there, the amenities and things. It just all fits together. It's just like makes the perfect vacation.
What kind of entertainment would be in the Disneyland hotel?
Well, when the Rather Corporation opened it, which is the main focus of my historical research, they would have strolling bands. Like they had a band called the Bellhops, and they would come through and they would say, "Any requests? Any Disney requests?" And so I remember one time in the mid 90s, I spent time out there singing Whale of a Tale from, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with the Bellhops. It was a beautiful summer evening. And it was me and my wife, and we were sitting there and we just got up and joined in a rousing rendition of Whale of a Tale with the Bellhops. And that was a very memorable evening.
Were they very similar to the Dapper Dans in their in a barbershop approach, or something different?
Yeah, they had those colorful costumes, but they had the instruments that they played too, and real friendly group of guys, and they knew every Disney song, so they would go around asking people, and they just strolled through the various areas of the hotel, and you could sit and listen to them. You could request a song, or you could dance, and again, picture yourself on a beautiful summer evening with the wind just barely blowing, and you got Disneyland right across the street, and you're at the Disneyland Hotel, enjoying yourself with this band. And then they also had featured entertainment at some of the clubs and things that they had there. I remember going to see a band called Reflections, and they played at one of the outdoor nightclubs that were there. So you could sit there enjoying a beverage, and again, cool breeze blowing, and you're on the marina at the hotel listening to a band, play some of your favorite tunes.
Well, you're obviously very passionate about the subject, so this might be a redundant question, but I'm going to ask anyway. What would cause there to be the need for multiple books regarding the same hotel? It seems like a very specific thing to write about.
Well, this all started in I think it was 1995, and my wife and I had checked into the hotel. We were on our way to our room with the bellman, and he had mentioned to us, "Hey, I've been here since 1968," and this was almost 30 years later. And he said, nobody's ever written anything about this place, of significance. There's been stories and everything, but nobody's ever written anything. And this place has a really, really rich history. The architecture, the people that have stayed here, the development of the hotel, along with paralleling the development of Disneyland. The parallels between the original owner, because a lot of people don't know that the hotel was not owned by Disney until 1988. It was owned privately by a family called the Rather family, Wrather, and in principle, Jack Rather. They all owned Lassie, the Lone Ranger. They owned the concessions at the Spruce Goose and the Queen Mary. They were radio stations, television stations. They were a well-diversified company. And they had the money to build the hotel when Walt Disney was out of money in 1955 to build the hotel. They had the money to build the hotel. And the parallels between Jack Rather and Walt Disney, like both were family men. both took a huge gamble in building one the hotel and one the park out in the middle of nowhere, in Anaheim, and investing a lot of their own wealth and money to do so. Both liked families to be entertained, both liked, people to go there and have a great time, and they paid attention to details and they paid attention to quality. Jack wanted the hotel to be something that people would remember, but at the same time, he knew that it was the Ed McMahon to Johnny Carson. It was the prelude to the featured attraction, which was Disneyland. But he wanted people to have a good time. He wanted people to enjoy themselves, and he wanted families to have fun. So he put amenities in there like, heated swimming pools and arcades and restaurants and shops and everything. So after meeting with that bellman, whose name was Mike Connors, he ended up staying there almost 50 years. I said to myself, well, it's always been on my bucket list to write a book. And so I kind of tabled that in the back of my head. And then I read an article by a lady named Mary Andrick, who wrote for the 25-year history of the hotel in 1980. She wrote I think a 9-page story on the history of the Disneyland Hotel, which covered things in kind of a broad term. So I said, I want to go into this further. I want to dig deeper. And so I started acquiring all kinds of information and material, and I met people, and I got anecdotes and stories, and then it started, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it eventually turned into the first book. And after that, it was an avalanche, because I had everybody under the sun coming to me saying, hey, I worked there 40 years. I've got 1,000 pictures. You want to see them? Or I checked John Wayne into his room, or I checked Lucille Ball into her room. And, it just, yeah.
Because something I've discovered in interviewing different people is sometimes I get very surprised at how willing people are to share things that I didn't ask them.
Yeah.
Did that happen to you too?
Yeah. And anyway, it's just from there, it just kind of exploded. And I started getting even more and more information. And so I said, I can really delve into this in depth. So, it produced a book. And then I said, well, I need to cover each decade, more in depth. And I started getting more and more pictures. And I'll tell you about a vault find in a few minutes.
Okay.
A Rather family vault find that I had, but I think I'm rambling, so I better let you get in here.
It's all right. Is there something that happened in your journey of putting this book together that you may have gone into it with a certain intention and a game plan, but maybe something popped up that you didn't even see coming, and you were like, well, I have to add this in there?
Oh, many things. I mean, like I said, when I published the first book, that was kind of the tip of the iceberg, and I can go back to that first book, which is why I did a revised version, which is going to be out in August. And I added better pictures and a lot more story and details in the captions and things like that. But you always think everything about something, or quite a bit about something, and then you're humbled, because you'll meet somebody. Like, I met guys that were like the vice president for 35 years, and they tell me inside stories or details on buildings or plans that got put back because of this reason and that reason. And you learn so many inside things that you just feel like you have to tell it. That has to be known.
I'm a huge Haunted Mansion fan. I'm sure a lot of folks watching this show right now are big Haunted Mansion fans as well. I have to ask this because I know there are so many stories of hotels that have hauntings. Is there any kind of haunting at the Disneyland Hotel?
There are a couple of ghost stories. There is the story of the person that was working in construction and fell to his death. And people say they see him walking, over. It's in an area that used to be called the Bonita Tower. I don't know what they call it now. They've changed the name a couple of times, but it's the last tower built there. And there's people that say they see him walking there. Then there's cast members who, go walk their rounds on security, and they'll hear strange things happen in the elevator hall, the areas of the and the stairs. That's what I meant to say. They'll hear voices in the stairwell, but there's no people there, and things like that. But that's a couple of instances where there's been ghosts and everything. So I'm a big Haunted Mansion fan as well. I kissed my first girl in the Haunted Mansion there in 1970 on the cheek, and it was the start of something big for me. So,
but the part that we're not telling anybody is it was actually the bride Constance that you kissed, and there was no. I'm just kidding.
I looked and she was gone.
Yeah, there you go. Now you've got a good story. No, I'm just kidding. So one of the things that I think is interesting about the parks is how they're kind of this living, breathing organism in a sense that it's always Disney, but it's ever expanding and changing. I imagine the hotel is the same way, but do you, in your uncovering all this information about the hotel, did you find anything that has not changed? Anything that stayed, a piece of furniture or a painting or something that's just no one wants to touch it because it's been there since the beginning?
Actually, no. The original hotel is completely gone. That was removed in 1999 to make way for Downtown Disney.
So it's gone.
So
the hotel's gone.
The original Disneyland hotel with its 11 two-story garden structures and restaurants and shops was completely removed in 1999. Just run over with the bulldozer. My wife and I stayed there the last night that those garden structures were open for business, and the bulldozers were literally across the street. We could hear them warming up. After we checked out, that was it. So there's the oldest thing there now is from 1961, 1962, and that's the north end of the Sierra Tower, which is called something else now as well. But that's the oldest structure that's there. Somebody told me that there is an orange tree on the property that's been there even before the hotel was built. But I can't seem to find it, and I can't get a hold of them to confirm where that's at. And I've walked the entire grounds, and I just don't see it.
Do you think that there's any kind of talk of a resurgence of maybe trying to reestablish that building the way, at some point, or maybe not in the same location, but I mean, try to like recreate what they had, or is there no interest in that?
I pitched that idea to them. I said, what you should do is build one of those garden structures and embrace and welcome the mid-century modern look of those buildings. I said people could stay in there, for their anniversaries if they stayed in there for their honeymoons in the 60s or 70s, And I said those rooms would sell out fast because there's a lot of people with nostalgia in mind. And I know the perfect location for it. It's right in front where there's kind of a big garden area. They could erect one of those two-story garden structures. And I submitted something to Disney, and I got a nice thing back saying we are not allowed to accept unsolicited material. So thank you, but thanks, but no thanks. But I would love to be able to get in with somebody and show them the ideas to build another garden structure in there, because I think it would sell well and it would be well appreciated by the guests.
I'm sure a lot of park fans have learned through the years how Disney will, on occasion, auction something off from the park itself. Once the hotel was effectively, removed in the late 90s, do you know if there were anything auctioned off, from the hotel?
Yeah, there was a restaurant there called the Monorail Cafe, which was actually the old coffee shop at the hotel that opened in 1956. In 1986, it got renamed and rethemed to the Monorail Cafe. It's right next to where the monorail goes by. And they had an auction of all of the fixtures and menus and wall art and things like that. That was probably close to that time period, 1999 or 2000. And I saw a lot of things on eBay and stuff that, people, salt and pepper shakers that, had Mickey themed ears and, and placemats and mugs and things like that said the Disneyland Hotel. One of the most cherished items was the menu from that restaurant. And when we went to that restaurant the last time, my wife and I, two of those menus mysteriously ended up in in our possession, and we never did make it to give them back. So,
so they're framed now somewhere, right?
yeah, they're a part of my collection.
You were you're a collector, of course, as you were just mentioning about the menus, and you have the world's largest collection of items from the hotel. Is that right?
I believe that to be so. I have more than what they have in the archives because in Burbank, because they didn't own the hotel, so they didn't collect a lot of material on the hotel. But I have, it's just, my wife calls it her kitchen because I spent so much on it. We never redid her kitchen.
Oh,
And so that's called her kitchen. But I have like almost every brochure from every year the hotel was open. Packets, publicity packets. I have, you name it. I mean, I have films. I found films, from the hotel that they did for promotional events from the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. Placemats from the restaurants, menus from the restaurants.
Have you ever been approached by the Walt Disney Family Museum about like maybe having like a rotating collection where you get to have it on display somewhere?
I did a lecture there. Gosh, it was several years ago, but I did a talk there on the history of the Disneyland Hotel, and I mentioned to them, that I had all of this stuff, and they said that they would be interested in talking to me about it, but they're primarily focused on Walt Disney, and so would kind of be a little bit of a stretch, even though I did locate a whole bunch of pictures of Jack Rather, the original owner, with Walt Disney and with his brother Roy Disney. That I had as well as a lot of communications and memorandums between the two from the business side of things, from the 50s when they were getting ready to open the hotel all the way through the 80s when Jack Rather passed away.
How much involvement did Walt actually have then in just the hotel itself?
Jack Rather primarily dealt with Roy O. Disney in the Disney, because Roy was the business side of things. Walt was the creative side of things. Walt knew that in order for Disneyland to be successful, that he would have to have an upscale hotel right next to the park. But they were out of money. They spent everything they had on Disneyland, and that's why they approached Jack Rather to begin with. And Jack Rather got in to the beginnings of the negotiations because of his connections at ABC, because The Lone Ranger and Lassie were on ABC. And he first heard about this and stressed to the Disney company at that time that he wanted to build the hotel through his connections with ABC in 1954 and 1955. But Jack Rather primarily dealt with Roy O. Disney. I have, they used to have these things called day timers, and what they were precursors to like iPads and things, but you had to write in your appointments. And so they list what your schedule of appointments were for that day. And I have Jack Rather's copies of his from 1954, 1955, and 1956. And they would say things like meeting in Burbank with Roy O. Disney and, Disney Legal and all the names of the people there. But he initially talked to Walt Disney about it, but then Walt kind of turned it over to Roy. And they finalized all the deals, to make the hotel what it was in 1954, 55.
So if the hotel was no longer something they wanted to have go, I mean, I assume the popularity of the hotel maintained up to the very end, right?
It ebbed and flowed, with the economy and with the rise in attendance at Disneyland. There were some, sort of lean times. And one of the problems that they had initially, at least, is the summer months were packed. 100% booked occupancy. But then, when you got out of summer, when kids were back in school, it went down into the 70s, 60s and 70% occupancy, which was the reason why they kept building the convention facilities on the grounds of the hotel, as well as the Anaheim Convention Center. They wanted to attract people during the off season. And the way to do that was to have their conventions there in Anaheim. And that worked really well. They started picking up. It got into the 80s, high 80s and low 90s, even in the quote off season, which is something that they wanted to fill the calendar year round.
So was there another hotel that sort of took the place of it as far as maybe not the location, but the expectation of this is where you would stay?
Well, right away, I mean, almost immediately after the hotel was built, you know, the appeal of Disneyland was very apparent, and so all of these other, you know, minor hotel chains or motels, you know, came on the scene on Harbor Boulevard and surrounding Disneyland, and those came into play. And I think by 1958 or 1960, you know, there was, you know, 30 other hotels that people could stay at, and they were always a little bit cheaper than the Disneyland hotel. You know, they might not have been as you know, 5-star. They might have been a 2-star or a 3-star, but a lot of people looked at it as, hey, we're going there to go to Disneyland, and we just want a safe, clean place to stay. So we don't care if we stay at, you know, the Peter Pan or the Charter House or the Saga, or, you know, they would. But for people that really wanted the true Disney immersion and experience, you know, they stayed at the Disneyland Hotel. They had a lot higher occupancy rate, more rooms, more amenities, more features, things. And then that was especially so after they moved the monorail over to the hotel in 1961, is then people had a way into Disneyland that they didn't have to go through the main gate or the front gate. That was a feature that the hotel had that all of the other hotels didn't have.
How many times did you stay there?
At the Disneyland Hotel?
Yeah.
Well, put it this way. I have 3 kids, and there was a period in there where my kids said, "Do we have to go to Disneyland again?" You know, and I said, "Yes, we do." Let's see. I don't know if I could even count. I've been there quite a few times. I've been fortunate to stay in a lot of the signature suites too. Almost every signature suite that's there, and those are really cool. You know, those are really, really fun to stay at. One of them in particular, the Pirates of the Caribbean suite, when you ring the doorbell, you press the doorbell and it says, yo ho, a pirate's life for me. So guess what my kids had to do 1,000 times? You know, they had to press that doorbell. But it's themed inside, and there were props in there from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and you know, there's a galley bed that looks like something on a old ship. You know, they really themed those really nicely.
Oh wow! Was there a favorite room of yours that you always would kind of hope that would be open for you?
Well, like the Adventureland suite had props from old Disneyland and an interactive map of the Jungle Cruise ride. But my favorite room wasn't one of those signature suites. My favorite room was called the Rather Suite, or the Presidential Suite, which is in the Marina Tower. It was 3,000 square feet. It was at the very top. It had its own garden patio, its own kitchen with its own maid and its own cook. And what they used that for were for when, like, celebrities, big name celebrities, like I said, John Wayne, Lucille Ball, Frank Sinatra, stayed there. They didn't have to go down and sit in the restaurants and get bothered by people. They could have the chef from one of those restaurants come up and prepare a meal for them inside the room. And they had a maid that was on call that had her own little area in there that she stayed in. So anything they needed, coffee, you know, tucking in, whatever, they could get, those high-end celebrities could get. That was my favorite room. It was actually only 1 bedroom, but it was a huge master bedroom with a sauna, and it was just really elaborate. And I got to stay in that room, I think, 4 different times. And we loved that. The view was amazing, and just the size of the room, and, you know, it was relaxing and everything.
What's perhaps the strangest piece of memorabilia that you have that just when you look at it, it's just, you just feel so fortunate, but it's very an odd piece?
Let me think. I think I have something from one of the bathrooms, and it's something about how, you know, conserve water, flush if you have to, or something like that. And, you know, don't run your hands under the water for so long. It's when we were having a drought out here, and they had a placard that said this on there, and that's pretty unusual to have. But it was something that I didn't have, you know, that I wanted to have as part of that. So a thing telling you to only flush when you have to is I think is pretty strange. But I have like a piece of the old chandelier. There used to be this really ornate chandelier that was up there. It was kind of, it's analogous to like when they took the Main Street Electrical Parade apart, they sold each individual light bulb. Well, I have a small plastic piece from that chandelier, and then I have a whole picture of the chandelier itself, and you could see how the pieces interlocked and everything. I have that. I have the original groundbreaking shovel from March 18th, 1955 that was gold spray painted, and it says, "Welcome to Anaheim, the Disneyland Hotel. Good luck," with some shamrocks painted on it, and it's gold spray painted. And that was presented to Jack Rather at the luncheon after the groundbreaking for the hotel on March 18th, 1955. That belongs to Chris Rather, who's Jack Rather's son. And Chris and I have become really good friends. And he let me borrow that so I could, show it at events and things that I go to speak or see people and everything. And that's a pretty unique piece also.
And that was Chris that wrote the foreword to the book, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I like his story about how his father fired one of the managers when they weren't taking care of the flowers.
Yeah, he was very much attention to detail. And, like I said, he owned television shows, radio stations. He owned oil wells. He owned restaurants. He was a well-diversified man. But his favorite business thing that he owned was the Disneyland Hotel. And he took great pride in that place and made sure that everything was just right. I think 2 years after it opened, they won the equivalent of the Academy Awards for landscaping. I forgot the name of the award, but the landscaping won an award. The buildings were winning architectural awards for their design and quality and features and things like that. So he was very into that place being, completely up to speed. In fact, they used to have a thing called the 45-minute warning. And what that was his office in Beverly Hills on Canyon Drive. When he would say on the phone, "I'm headed down to the hotel," that was the 45-minute warning to everybody. Then it immediately set forth all these calls and pages and "Hey, Jack's on his way. We got 45 minutes." And everybody would make a sweep of the ground so there was no paper in the garden beds, and the garbage cans were emptied and the windows were washed. That was their 45-minute alert and drill to get the place looking shipshape.
Some things never change. It reminds me of when the corporate office would come and visit the retail store I used to work in. It's the same thing. They would be like, "Corporate's coming tomorrow. Everybody stop what you're doing and clean right now."
Yep, same thing. Same thing.
Is there something that you wish you had in your collection that you only have a photograph of?
The blueprints, the original blueprints. I have a picture of some guys holding them when they surveyed the grounds. I have a picture of the original architects, the original contractors, and a gentleman named C.V. Woods, who was the first president of Disneyland. And they're all on the grounds in the middle of the Orange Grove with the blueprints all spread out. I have blueprints of the Bonita Tower, the Sierra Tower, and a lot of the different things that they built along the way, but I don't have those original garden structure blueprints, and I'd love to get a copy. I've searched everywhere. The original architects are both passed away, and their business divided in 1958, and who knows who took what or who threw away what. I ran into a box of or several boxes of old vintage photographs one time when I was visiting the hotel, and they brought me into a private room, and one of the cast members introduced me to the vice president there, and he said, "Look at these boxes of old pictures that we found." He said, we were told to throw these away, just throw them in the dumpster. And these were priceless. And like 1,000 pictures from the earliest days in the history of the hotel. And I said, can you imagine if they would have thrown those away? Yeah. So that's something that I would like. And there's also,
where are they? Where'd they go?
What's that? Those pictures?
Yeah.
I told them send them to the archives, so they sent them to the Disney archives in Burbank with Becky Klein. At the time, it was Dave Smith, but now it's Becky Klein, and she has them there. And now I can't see them. I can't have access to them because you have to be working on a project before they'll allow you to view anything. So it was kind of like I shouldn't have done that, but I didn't want them to throw them away.
How often did Walt stay in the hotel? Do you know?
Not hardly at all, because he had an apartment at Disneyland, and he would stay at his apartment at Disneyland. Now, it's a different story for his daughter Diane and Sharon. And when I did get to speak at the Disney Family Museum, I got to meet Ron Miller and Diane Disney Miller, Walt's oldest daughter, and her husband. And they told me an interesting story one time about how they went to check in to the Disneyland Hotel. And it was in 1957. And they said they went to check in and they said, I'm Diane Disney Miller. And the lady at the desk said, yeah, sure you are. You know, yeah, sure, Walt Disney's your dad. Yeah, okay, yeah, we believe you. And they didn't believe her. And they were just going to give her like a standard room, or she had to wait or something. You know, she was just considered an ordinary person who was checking in there. And then they had it confirmed that she was indeed Walt Disney's daughter. And they had young kids at that time, and they were tired and they wanted to get checked into the room. And when the girl did find out, she was very apologetic, and they got him a suite right away.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you've covered the gamut of what you want to cover, or is there another book about the hotel in mind, or do you want to just completely go and writing about a different topic altogether?
No, I've got another one on the 60s that's going to be coming out. It's actually going to be coming out around Christmas time. And that's a really cool book because the 60s was the most dynamic decade for the hotel. That's when the towers were added, the marina was added, all kinds of things. They were doing well. They were flush with cash. They could put in, Disneyland was doing well. 1959 saw the monorail, the Matterhorn, the submarine rides coming into Disneyland, and that attendance just skyrocketed. And then they brought the monorail over to the hotel in 61. That was a really dynamic decade. So that's going to be a photo-filled book with very rare photographs. And then I want to do the 70s, and then I want to do the 80s when the Rather family sold to Walt Disney, or the Walt Disney Company, and then I'm done.
That's it for books, or that's it for the hotel series?
That's it for the hotel. Okay. I found some other interesting things, during my research jaunts that I could tell you about. That I have some other projects. I am going to be in this Behind the Attractions on the Disneyland Hotel episode, but there's other things that I have irons in the fire for documentary projects on some of the material that I found. I can elaborate. One of the things that I found, the Rather family had this storage vault in Hollywood. It's at a place called Hollywood Vaults, and it's temperature controlled. The location inside looks like something out of a James Bond movie, very high tech with doors that open up out of walls, with frosted glass, and it's freezing cold in there because it's temperature controlled. Well, Chris Rather asked me if I wanted to go take a look inside the vault, that he hadn't been there in 30 years. Would you like to go take a look? There might be some business related things, about the hotel. To make a long story short, I asked if that was a trick question. And my wife and I went down, and I thought if I found 10 pictures in there or 10 items that I hadn't seen before, it would be a successful trip, because I live in Northern California and this is in Southern California, Hollywood, Burbank. It's an hour flight. When 3 hours, when you consider you got to get there early, you got to check in, you got to wait. So we were flying out that morning and flying home that night. And I said, if I find 10 things in here, this is going to be a successful trip. I scanned 2,000 pictures. I found 17 films. 3 films had Disneyland opening day in color. And color footage of Disneyland's opening day was almost unheard of. One of them had Walt Disney actually dedicating Disneyland in color. So I found that. And another one had them arriving with the buses that the celebrities came in on. So they were arriving with Fess Parker, Buddy Ebsen, Eddie Fisher, Debbie Reynolds, Don DeFore, all the celebrities that were there that day. They arrived on these buses, and it shows them getting off the buses and then entering into Disneyland. It shows the pre-parade. It shows the actual parade. It shows all kinds of Autopia on opening day. It shows Ronald Reagan, who was one of the MCs that day, and he interviewed the Rathers. And it's in this beautifully, beautifully preserved color, because it's inside the storage vault that's made to preserve photographs and films. And it was just like an historic find.
Is this are these things that there's just so much stuff in storage that they don't know what they have?
Chris didn't really know. Chris Rather didn't really know what was in there. He just wanted a place to safely store it, and he didn't get involved so much in the history that I've gotten involved, because he even will ask me, "Hey, what did we do in 1974? Why did this happen in 1974?" Somebody called me the other day and said, "I'm upset because this happened at the hotel." He goes, "Don, what was going on?" And I'll look at some of the memorandums and I'll tell him, "Oh, so and so was fired." And so naturally their grandson or their son is upset that their deceased father was fired, and they want to know why. Instances like that. So Chris didn't really have a vested interest in knowing about the history and everything. He was made president of Rather Corporation in 1984 after his father passed away from cancer. Jack had got cancer twice. The first time it went away, and then the second time it took his life, 3 years later, 33 months later. And Chris was made president and CEO of Rather Corporation, but he really didn't want to do that because he wanted to teach. He got a PhD in mathematics and he wanted to teach, in mathematics. And because his last name was Rather, he had to take over the company. And that coincided with Michael Eisner taking over at Disney. So you have Chris, who, was forced upon business against Rather, who was one of the sharpest businessmen on the planet at the time. And it just really wasn't fair, and so, Chris knew that what he was up against and everything, when they started in the negotiations for the sale of Rather to Disney.
When you decided to embark on all this, because I mean, this is just you're like an encyclopedia about the subject. It's amazing. Was there a competing fascination in history that you were like, I could either write about the Disneyland Hotel or I could write about other thing?
Well, there was already a million books on Disneyland. There was already a million books on Walt Disney. And quite frankly, I didn't know enough about those, to do a book. I knew that nothing had been written on the hotel. So I knew that that would be something new. I knew that that would be something. Now, whether it was popular or not, whether it sold, I always say, if you want to make $1 an hour, write a book. And you don't do it for the money. You do it for the passion, for the love of your subject, and to make people happy so they can relive some fond memories, and that's happened quite a bit, and that's what makes me happy. I mean, don't get me wrong. If I could have, gone out and bought a brand new Mercedes and a house in Beverly Hills, that would have been great. And I would have loved that, but that wasn't why I did it. And that wasn't why my motivating factor.
This seems like as good a time as any to sort of pause and let everybody know if you'd like to pre-order or order a copy of the newest Disneyland Hotel book. You can go to theoldmillpress.com and it's right there. Is that the best way to do that?
Yes, and that's the revised edition of the book. And I put I changed almost every picture from the original book, and these are amazing pictures that I've accumulated since then, since the first book came out, to replace those other ones. Well, I thought they were great before, but these even plus the book, and it's
Will you be signing the books if people order on the website, or is that something they have to just come see you in person?
They will, if they buy them, they will come signed. I had to sign them on a little placard that will be pasted in the book due to COVID and things, but they will be signed.
Okay. Are people giving you a lot of good feedback that you recaptured something for them?
Oh, yeah. And that's what I enjoy the most. I get people that say, we spent our honeymoon in 1964, and I saw a picture that you posted on Facebook of the Sierra Tower in 1964, and it just brought back so many, my husband passed away last month, and I, was going through things, and this just brought back so many happy memories, and you put a smile on my face when I've been crying for the last month, and oh
my gosh.
And then on the same token too, I get people that say, why can't they bring back one of those garden structures? I'd love to stay in it. But one more thing that I can't let get by before this is over. Sure. One of the people that I got to meet through the books was a gentleman named Alfred Nicholson. And who was Alfred Nicholson? Well, he was the architect of all of the towers and the monorail building and the monorail cafe. Anything after 1960, he was the lead architect. He was in a firm called Weber and Nicholson. And he called me one day, 12 years ago. And I looked at my caller ID and it said Alfred Nicholson. I said, no, this can't be the Alfred Nicholson, because I knew of him, because I knew he had built and designed all those rooms. And he lived in Malibu, California. And he said, hi, Don, it's Alfred Nicholson. I bought your books and I want to come up and see you. He lived in Malibu. I lived near San Francisco. He drove up to meet me at my house here in Fremont. And he goes, come around. And we went to his trunk, and there was blueprints and hundreds of photographs and brochures and memorandums and permits and letters. The trunk was full of stuff. And he said, help me get this out. You can copy whatever you want. And he was just another vault of information. He was a World War II vet. He flew in a B-24 Liberator in World War II. He had all this information, and we ended up spending the weekend together that weekend, where he told me all these stories about when they built this. And he would always be drawing when he would talk. He had a legal pad there, and I saved every one of his drawings. Like, he would draw sketches of the rooms or of the towers or the restaurants. And I have every one of those. Sadly, Al passed away 2 years ago, but I had, 24 meetings with him, and he just was an amazing, amazing guy. The last thing I want to say on it is his partner was a guy named Kurt Weber, his business partner, and they had a falling out in the mid '80s. They didn't speak to each other since the mid '80s. After Al came to see me the first time, it rekindled his interest in the Disneyland Hotel, which was his favorite project he ever worked on. And the first thing he did was, when he went back to Southern California, was he knocked on Kurt Weber's door and they hugged. And that was so cool, because they rekindled their friendship after, 30 some years. But he said it brought back too many pleasant memories, and he had to rekindle with Kurt Weber. And that was an amazing story that, I was very happy to facilitate.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I have to ask, I don't know why I didn't ask earlier. Was there a Haunted Mansion themed room?
No, there's Adventureland, there's Pirates of the Caribbean, there's the Mickey Suite. Did I say Pirates? Yeah, Pirates. What other suites?
How about the Space Mountain or anything from Tomorrowland?
No, they're mostly well, I guess the Pirates is an attraction or a ride. But they're all on the top floor of the Sierra Tower, the one that used to have the looking glass elevator, and the e-ticket lounges at the top. They're all up there. I'm trying to remember what else was in there. But the Adventureland suite was really, really nice too. I haven't stayed in the Mickey suite. That's the smallest of the suites, and that's more for young kids and families. And it's interesting because when we stayed in the Pirate suite, the bellman and we get a coordinator. We get what they call a VIP coordinator, who walks us up to our room and shows us all the features of the room. And she said, well, the person that stayed in here right before you was Kobe Bryant, and he brought his son up, or one of his kids up, for their birthday party, and they stayed 3 days. So, he just left. So we stayed there right after Kobe Bryant.
This was back in the 90s, though, right?
Yeah. This was, this was 10 years ago, a number of years ago. But the thing about it was, those rooms are like $3,500 a night. And they gave it to us for 4 nights. They comped us for 4 nights.
Oh, wow.
So we had $14,000, worth of rooms, that we were able to stay in. And that one's a 3-bedroom suite. So.
Okay. Before we get too close to the end here, I just want to remind everybody watching, if you are watching this live, if there's any questions that you've got going on in your mind right now that you'd like to ask Don, go ahead and put those in the live comments, and I will try to get to them here before we wrap things up. And if not, then I'll just ask Don a couple more questions, because I have no problem doing that too. So I guess I have to ask about food, because I love food, and I think there's some great food that is involved with Disney. Was there anything that was exclusively made for the hotel that you couldn't get at the parks?
They did have a 5-star restaurant that originally was called Granville's, and then it became Steakhouse 55, and now it closed. They just closed it, and I don't know why, but the news just came out a couple of weeks ago that the restaurant is now closed permanently. And they had special dishes and things that were in there. They would have, that was, a very high-end upscale restaurant. And they had pictures all over the walls, it was themed like Art Deco of the 30s, and they had pictures of celebrities, Humphrey Bogart and Shirley Temple, and all the famous people in the 30s and 40s that were in there. It was a real plush, neat place to eat. But they had a real special Eggs Benedict. I love Eggs Benedict for breakfast. And they had a real special Eggs Benedict that was there. But they would always, have specials. But they also had Goofy's Kitchen, where kids could go, and it was a buffet. They would have specialty dishes in there and everything. And
did you get churros in there too, or no?
Yeah. You could get churros. There was a coffee shop there. There was, snack places. You could get chicken nuggets or hot dogs or French fries or burgers. It had everything. The hotel had everything. It was an adventure in and of itself. You could go there and just, walk around and do things there and have a blast. And it was free, for the most part free.
Did you find that was serving as a form of competition for being in the park? Like, or, make you want to stay there and not want to go to the theme park?
No, I think what they geared themselves were like for people to come back there midday after, being tired at Disneyland. You could take a swim or a lounge around the pool, have lunch there where the restaurants weren't as crowded as they were inside Disneyland. And you had a variety of restaurants, with all different budgets. Plus you could shop for things there, and it just wasn't as crowded as Disneyland. And it was kind of a relief. They never wanted to compete with Disneyland. They always knew, like I said, that they were the precursor to the main event. But they did want people to have things available to them or at their reach when they were at the hotel.
That's phenomenal. Well, I mean, I'm looking forward to the new book, and of course the other two that you just mentioned, which is awesome. And it sounds like you got your work ahead of you, unless you've already completed them, and I didn't realize that.
No, the 50s book is available at magicalhotel.com. And I only have about 75 copies of that one left. So that one's at magicalhotel.com. And again, those are, in my garage. So I'll sign those and send them if anybody wants those. That's the book with the longest title in the world, but that one came after I visited the storage vault because I got all these extra pictures and information, and I had to do one on the 50s. But the other thing I'm excited about is the Behind the Attractions episode on the Disneyland Hotel. I haven't seen it, but I read a review and it said that I'm featured prominently, so I didn't end up on the cutting room floor, and I'm very happy about that.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was just about to do that. So for those folks watching this who didn't hear the beginning part of this episode, Don's going to be featured on Disney Plus in a series called Behind the Attraction, and they're going to do a couple episodes. Is it about the hotel, or is it just one?
One on the hotel, and I've been told I've been the other one on the monorail when they extended the monorail to the hotel. So I make a cameo in one, and the other one, I guess I'm in it quite a bit. So
and those are going to be coming out this summer, right?
Yeah, they released the first 5 episodes, but the second 5 episodes, which is the 2 I'm going to be in, are going to be released. They haven't picked a date. They just said, stay tuned. So does that ring a bell?
Well,
it's spelled a little differently, but,
Right. The meaning is very similar.
Yeah.
Well, we're all looking forward to seeing you on Disney Plus. And Don, thanks for your time and all of your great information and anecdotes about the Disneyland Hotel tonight.
It's been my pleasure. Believe me, I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Don. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Well, everybody, we have come up to the top of the hour just about here. And I just want to thank everybody at home for watching this episode of Stay Tuned Live. I would like to make a couple reminders before this episode is all completed. First and foremost, if you are not familiar with Stay Tuned already, please check out Stay Tuned in your favorite podcast app. That includes like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, all of those great locations for podcasts. As far as what Don was talking about, the Behind the Attraction episodes he's going to be in, that's going to be on Disney Plus sometime this summer, but you can already catch the first 5 episodes of Behind the Attraction. They're already streaming right now on Disney Plus as we speak here right now. Come back to Streaming the Magic next month, August. I don't know if I have the date secured yet, but just keep an eye out because I'll be doing another one of these summer reading series episodes with Dave Bossert. You may remember Dave from last season of Stay Tuned Live. He was here talking with me about his work on Fantasia 2000 and his book 3D Disneyland. Well, he's got a new book coming out later this year, and we're going to be talking with Dave in August about that. So just keep your eyes peeled for that. If you'd like to be a supporter of this show, you can follow me in a number of different ways on YouTube, on Twitch. I have a Patreon, which would be amazing if you'd like to follow me there. You can follow for free, or you can throw money at me and I'll give you extra perks. So the address for that is patreon.com. Actually, it's right here. There it is, patreon.com/Phil Machi, and you'll be able to check all that out. And lastly, I would like to mention I've got a really, really big project coming up very soon on September 5th. Believe it or not, after 3 years of making podcasts and live streams under the Stay Tuned title, there is going to be the very first, I'm proud to say, very first Stay Tuned feature-length documentary. Yes, you heard that right. It's going to be a feature-length documentary. It's going to be available for free on YouTube. So go ahead and find me on YouTube. You can just search Stay Tuned, or you can simply type this in right here, youtube.com/C/Phil Machi. And that documentary is going to be looking at the history of Batman the Animated Series. So not Disney related, but very much animation related. There are 17 individuals who were involved in the creation of Batman the Animated Series back in the early 90s. And those folks were kind enough to spend their time with me to contribute their voices to this movie. So it's coming out on September 5th. Mark your calendar. And you can always follow Stay Tuned on Facebook as well if you want to be in the know with any of these projects that I mentioned. And lastly, I have to mention the Stay Tuned community page right here on Facebook. It's a group where people like yourselves who are interested in animation, Disney or otherwise, they all congregate together to talk about the latest cartoon releases and things like that. So just go to facebook.com/groups/Stay Tuners. I've been Phil Machi. You have been a fantastic audience. And until next month, keep those eyeballs peeled, those ears open, and be sure to stay tuned.